Hey everybody. Just want to go over real quick the PowerPoint on Chapter 17, How Do I Read Poetry? It's a very brief PowerPoint, just kind of highlighting some tips and tricks and good practices for when you're reading poetry to make sure that you are understanding the poem and then looking at all of the deeper elements to the poem. So one thing you want to do, you look on slide 3, some tips here. First, read it out loud. Read the poem out loud. Or at least be sounding it in your head as you're reading it. Rhyme and rhythm work in subtle ways to emphasize keywords and clarify meaning, so pay attention to the rhyme and the rhythm. Go slowly and pay attention to every word. Poetry is very short and compact, and typically poets agonize over every single word they put in the poem. So if it's there for a reason. Look up any words that you're unsure of. Look at difficult lines again and again. And reading it out loud will force you to interpret words and phrases that you might have skimmed over if you're reading it in your head. All right. Be sure that you understand the literal meaning. Go line by line and almost like translate it in a way. Put it in your own words. Look at the syntax, because poetry, we play with language in poetry. And so we're used to, sentences being, set up in a very distinct way. Subject, verb, object. And poets will completely rearrange the order of words. So they might also leave words out to create a rhythm or to stay with, especially if they're working with a certain form of poetry where they can only have so many syllables per line or something like that. They will leave a word out or shorten a word in a weird way. So pay attention to syntax and word choice. Pay attention to punctuation. We've even seen this ourselves, how punctuation can clue us into how different parts of a poem are connected to each other, what the relationship is, and how we're supposed to look at them together. So punctuation can be very important. Sometimes it's used to draw our attention and provide those clues. Sometimes it's just used in very strange ways. Sometimes it's not used at all, which you need to pay attention to as well, even though there's none there. You have to really figure out where ideas are beginning and ending if there's no punctuation. So knowing the literal meaning, looking at the syntax, and looking at the punctuation can definitely help. Once you kind of understand that literal meaning, then you can kind of start expanding on that base knowledge and looking at what else is going on in the poem and how to interpret it. So keep asking yourself questions like, who is the speaker? Because it's not necessarily the poet, right? Because the poet, just like a fiction author, can create a character that is speaking the words of the poem. So who is the speaker? Who is being addressed? Is it a beloved? Is it literally someone else in the poem? Is it just the reader? Or maybe the speaker is speaking to themselves? Who is being addressed in the poem? What is the message? What kind of images are included in the poem, and how do they contribute to what we get out of the poem? Are there any symbols? What do the symbols suggest? How does it all fit together? Looking at all those pieces, how does it all fit together? You're gonna, some questions to ask as you're reading. Can you paraphrase the poem if necessary? Who is the speaker, but how would you describe this persona? What kind of persona is it? What about the tone? Is there anything about the speaker's tone that's worth noting? And which words reveal the tone? Is it ironic? Right? And there's all different kinds of tones that poetry can have, that a speaker's tone could have. Are there any words that are heavily connotative, that we have deep associations with, besides the dictionary definition? Are there any words that have unusual or special meanings? Are any words or phrases repeated? Did you need to look any words up? What images are present in the poem? How do they relate to one another? Is there a pattern of these images that creates a motif? Um, is there a central controlling image, an image that the author comes back to, or that kind of goes through the whole poem? Are there any figures of speech used? Are there any symbols? What's the occasion for the poem or the setting? Can we tell, like, what the context was, right, for the poem being written, or the speaker speaking the poem? Can you tell what the theme is? What about metrics and sound and rhythm and rhyme? How do they affect how we read it? Um, just all these questions to ask yourself while you're reading to help you gain as full an understanding of the poem as possible. But you have to start with those basics. Start with, that line by line translation, looking at the syntax and the punctuation, and then work your way towards these other elements. And we're going to look at these other elements in a little more detail as well. All right, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, you're free to move on to the next lesson.